Hello, and welcome to Doctor Who 50 years ago, the show that looks back to the episode that aired in 1967 and looks at the differences between then and now. This week, the Moonbase episode 2, that titular base situated on a crater named after Ian McCaskill. I am Ben.
I am Luke.
And I'm Nick.
And here we are, and here we go into the news from 1967. On Sunday, the 12th of February, £25,000 worth of, that is the metric estimate, of tear gas were dropped by the US Army onto the Viet Cong Army. Or rather they would have, had they not left the area before the gassing had started. Ah, Vietnam, that wonderful thing that shows that US imperialism is imperiled rather than actually imperial, and that the US can lose wars.
The Americans can't claim the moral high ground when they're using chemical warfare.
And contrast this with 50 years later, can they claim the moral high ground when they're using drone warfare?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've at least banned chemical warfare now. They don't use chemical weapons anymore.
No.
Which is a plus, I guess.
Yeah, that's nice. On Monday the 13th of February, protests outside the Soviet embassy to China in Beijing finally ended, so the diplomats could go and do their thing. Here's an example of a country and another country having slight tense relations with one another, which we get no end of in the present day.
Yes. Yeah, and this is just carrying on from last week, isn't it? With the protests beginning.
Yes, it's the end of one crisis, and eventually we'll probably begin another crisis in the next week or so.
Yeah. The tensions between the Soviets and the Chinese are only going to ramp up in the next year or so.
Did the Chinese send in any soldiers or anything to try and shoot some of the protesters, or did they try and leave the embassy areas as alone as they could? Because if embassies were as protected as they are, as we discussed last week, would they be scared of any hostility surrounding them?
I guess the possibility exists, but I presume that the people just did their people thing of, we're going to shout at them for a week, but then apathy will take hold and we think, oh yeah, this is boring, let's go do something else.
Yeah, well, one has to assume they were encouraged and allowed to protest, but if they had actually raided the embassy, the Chinese army probably would have shot them.
That's a diplomatic incident and technically an invasion of Soviet territory. So,
yes.
Best not to do that. On Thursday, the 16th of February, one of the vice premiers in China denounced the Cultural Revolution as the cruelest struggle in party history. For it, he was criticised, lost his post, and sent to the Guangxi Mountains to do manual labour for 6 years. Internal Chinese politics is brutal, especially at this time in China's history.
Yeah, very true. To be honest, it's still quite brutal now. Although you'd get fired. You probably wouldn't get sent to do manual labour, but you would get fired and probably encouraged to move somewhere in the back and beyond where no one can care about you anymore.
Or perhaps imprisoned in a show trial, just in case, just to prove a point that crime is being stamped out, even though crime is how the government works.
Yes, you could be said that you were committing corruption or something like that.
Oh yes. And finally, on Saturday the 18th of February, Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer died of throat cancer. Now, I've included this because he was one of the great number of influential figures of the 20th century, being one of the many nuclear physicists who were in charge of the creation of the first atom bomb and breakthroughs in nuclear physics.
I think he was the head of that. The project?
The
Manhattan
Project, yes. Known also for the Indian proverb of I have become death, destroyer of worlds, Hiroshima, and all that jazz.
I would say that helping invent the nuclear bomb is a major factor in what contributed to the counter-revolution of the 1960s.
Yes.
Or a factor, at least, in terms of obviously having something terrible that is obviously a bad thing that people who would like to have peace in the world could rally around. So, like, the disarmament movement was sprung up in opposition to nuclear weapons.
Greenpeace,
and also,
C&D.
Yeah, the entire world can be destroyed in an hour or two. At what point is there really caring that much about your life? Why should you work so hard to get these very specific things if it could all be gone in an instant, pretty much?
That was the news. And now we shall get into the Moonbase episode 2, which was an episode that existed. Luke?
Existence is the best way to sum this one up. Yep, it's there. Huh. Yes, all right.
It's a quirky piece of television for 25 minutes.
Yeah. Good as last week's, but I would say probably the last 5 to 10 minutes are quite good. But there's a big chunk in the middle, or the first 15 minutes or so, where they're just sort of wasting time, padding pretty much.
Plodding around, setting the stakes.
Yeah. I mean, at least they pepper in a few bits of the Cybermen throughout, so that you remember the Cybermen are still there and are coming.
You're very right about that. The Cybermen, for most of this, become mythologized and existential, because you have loads of scenes of them running around saying, "There's something wrong with the gravitron. What could it be? What's this disease?" And it's only once we know it's the Cybermen, and also when they're saying, "Oh, the Cybermen, they don't exist," and as a result, Cybermen are this looming off-screen presence that makes them feel like villains of old, and so there is some sort of threat there to pass through the obvious padding scenes, even though I think to some extent they are trying to Terry Nation it a little. Let's make these into major villains, make money.
Yeah. That's kind of the thing. There's another good thing for the Cybermen is they're not speaking, which is always lovely, because with a silent enemy you can't actually negotiate with it, and to an extent I think that kind of relates to political context, how you have all these enemies of different nations and you can't seemingly negotiate with them because they're so utterly ingrained with their own ideological mantra, either we will survive, or communism will triumph, or capitalism will triumph, take your pick. It's got a few good points to it, and again, that's what this podcast is for, so let's go and review them. One of them is part of this first scene, which is like 5 minutes long. It's a really interesting shooting decision. And this is what happens in this scene. The Cyberman takes another member of the base instead of Jamie. Polly screams at it leaving, recognising it. The Doctor consults his diary, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the only time we actually see it on screen, ever, in an existing episode. Whilst Hobson consults Polly's short-term memory, and Pedler makes Cybermen and Doctor continuity, referencing the 10th planet like no other.
Here's the thing about this scene, the way it opens. I did my little ooh, because this might be the earliest. Let's have the villain reveal himself as the cliffhanger to episode 1, stare at the camera, and then walk off, like in The Time Warrior. Where
to defend Al, yeah.
Exactly. It shows that they've got to the point where they're willing to put their villain front and center because they think it looks good enough and it won't look cheap, like, say, a Menoptera might.
Or dinosaurs in Invasion of the Dinosaurs.
And to be fair, this Cyberman design doesn't look terrible. It looks, I can imagine in 1967, a young child would be scared by it. I mean, it looks quite menacing.
Simple but effective 1967 robotics. Hobson suspects the TARDIS crew of being the nuisance on the base and tells them to leave. The Doctor says they're going to stay with his wonderful little line of terrible things.
So this speech, the terrible things speech, which is very famous of the Second Doctor, I think is very crucial in laying out the Doctor's morality, especially the Second Doctor's morality. And I think it's sort of, to this day, this speech is often thought of as summing up the Doctor. He seeks out, he doesn't seek out evil, but when he sees evil, he will fight it and stop it. I mean, it's referenced throughout all other Doctors following Troughton. Most recent example I can think of where it's really spelt out is in Flatline with Peter Capaldi. I stop the monsters, he says, you know. So I think this is where it really takes off. I mean, it's dabbled with Hartnell's Doctor, but I feel like this is where it's truly entrenched from now on, and this is where it's codified.
Codified as part of the show's mantra.
Yeah, so I suppose the Doctor is an anti-establishment figure at this point now, in his second incarnation, and you could relate that to, yeah, he wants to seek out bad in the world and fight it and stop it.
Right of wrongs, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What's interesting is the way he says evil. There's no black and white to him. There is that thing, we need to go and get it. Once we kill it, that's what's going to sort things out. It's very idealistic and adventure serial logic, which obviously this is what it is. But if we're going to be relating it to the time, then we also have to think about the fact that people would very much like a figure to tell them what to do, how to get out of things.
The re-establishment of hierarchy.
In a sense, yeah.
And then the middle of the episode goes into a trough. In the control room, we spend a few minutes dealing with faults with the gravitron. There's fascinating acting in a noisy scene as they calmly try to stop a hurricane from wreaking havoc. It's the equivalent of the snowcat dealing with the astronauts from the 10th planet, I guess.
There's a particular line uttered by one of the characters in the scene is, "I've got wife and family down there."
Oh, yes.
Which is, I was like, you know, it's quite conspicuous, or no, there is quite a conspicuous lack of women on this Moonbase.
Yes.
Yes, this episode is not being particularly feminist or showing women doing anything important. In fact, later on in this episode, we even get another "make the tea/coffee, Polly, please."
Yeah, and in that sense, it's a step down from the 10th planet because we at least have that woman secretary.
Hey, people rag on Polly in this story, but Jamie's under wraps for all of it. Ben's basically off screen doing nothing. At least Polly's involved with the action most of the time. She's at the Doctor's side. She actually has some very good things that she does next episode. She's the one who actually does a lot of things. She gets quite a lot of interestingly snarky lines. She has those moments. But
true. But what I'm getting at is more, it's the writing it's not really the character's fault. It's more how it's being written in general. You can tell that Gerry Davis is not a feminist and not particularly good at writing women.
The thing about this scene which intrigued me was the fact that they talked to the controller, who speaks in the Queen's English.
Yes, he is a British man at the top of the food chain and shouts at them for being incompetent. We hear the political and scientific ramifications of the weather because it's Kit Pedler and his reality whiplash, and the base gets on with even more testing of the gravitron, and the Doctor comes in mumbling about testing hairs, trousers and boots.
The next appearance of the Cybermen, we have the Cyber Controller with his massive brain. And I was wondering if there was any... In that story, the Cybermen are so high, like, there is the Cyber Controller and then there's fleets of Cybermen. that's the first time that they get a proper leader, and it's the same leader here. In order to make them more into villains, does he try and invoke that sneer at the authority sort of thing? Because it's Pedler and Davis again, and the Controller is horrible in this story. What do we think about that?
You could argue it probably further degenerates with the cyber planners, with the wheel in space and the invasion, and then when it's finally taken out of Pedler and Davis's hands and given to the 80s team, it's fully, the Cybermen are just turned into a military robotic force with cyber lieutenants and all that jazz.
I'm going to say grasping at straws.
That too. Ben and Polly deal with the minuscule things, and Polly's still tending Jamie, under the weather with not enough lines flu. A Cyberman comes in, because Cybermen are in this, deals with them and then takes another patient, again ignoring Jamie, and the Doctor deals with the victims of the attack. Not much happens, really.
Yeah, although I do like the fact, okay, it's a bit silly the Cyberman does just leave him there, but that moment when he stares at, when it stares at Polly, and as she moves, it just follows her.
Yes.
That's really weird and creepy.
Good
I
direction.
really thought that. Yeah, I thought that was really creepy and a nice touch. Again, it's showcasing the new Cyberman design, but not giving too much away just yet. You know?
Yeah, it's not something you necessarily get in the Cybermen 50 years on.
Oh, also just missed it with the boots, but when the guy they're doing stuff and the Doctor just bends down and just starts looking at a guy's shoe whilst he's wearing it. That's so weird and alien. I love it. That's just a great moment.
Yeah,
character.
Troughton grabs all the attention beautifully. He's invested again, thank goodness.
Yeah, you couldn't imagine the first Doctor doing this. So,
if anything, it can be, if the story's falling down, like in The Underwater Menace, and sometimes in this episode, Troughton is literally holding the show together. He's that important, and thank God he exists, man.
A lot like Peter Capaldi nowadays.
My goodness me, you're right. Yes, that's a wonderful comparison to make. Because let's face it, we are cynical fans, and yeah.
Often when the writing is bad, the show is only as good as the lead actor is. And
his belief in it, yes. And
yes.
Thank goodness we have a lead actor who has seen 50 years of Doctor Who and is truly a believer. The scientists notice yet another air pressure drop, and the episode confirms that the Cybermen have made an extremely not airtight hole in the base. They also notice pieces of the radio have been damaged, and the Doctor and the crew make perfect scapegoats for the Cybermen's vandalism, which is pretty good, because what were the Cybermen going to do if the Doctor and lot hadn't arrived? Were they just going to confront the base earlier, or what?
The Cybermen's whole plan is stupid. Everyone in this episode is stupid.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. The captain is moronic. Oh, I don't trust the Doctor. Oh, but you can work in here for a day. That's fine. Yeah, whatever. I'll just leave you to it. Yeah.
Yes, and it gets to the point where the Doctor is an idiot in a moment.
And Ben's an idiot because he leaves Polly, and immediately, I actually wrote this down. Is a Cyberman going to attack her? And then I ticked it when it happened 5 seconds later in a reveal shot.
Ah, yes. What a shame.
And also, Jamie's an idiot because he's just blabbering nonsense.
Well, it's not really his fault.
It's not his fault, yeah.
Again, it's sort of referencing, like, they're keeping up with the fact that he's from the 18th century.
It's early days. He's literally having his backstory wrenched from him. No, you will become a fully fledged member of the TARDIS crew. We will destroy your backstory, damn it.
Yes. He's well on the way becoming Fraser Hines, alright? Leave him alone.
The Doctor fails to find the virus's origin and manages to persuade Hobson he's on the case with false evidence and Polly making coffee.
And I've made a note of the direct quote. I wrote this as the Doctor said it. This is a pretty bad line, I think. Probably one of the worst lines with regards to women in the show's history is, why not make some coffee to keep them happy while I think of something? And Polly just meekly goes, okay. This is so outdated now. It feels so wrong for the Doctor to be saying something like this. He basically just says, let me, the man, think of something, and you just go make coffee to distract the stupid other people before I can trick them.
The same thing happens in the 10th Planet, where she says, can I make myself useful by making some coffee? And
but at least
in the War Machines, she's also making coffee.
Yeah, but at least she offers it in the 10th Planet, for instance. Here, the Doctor actually orders her to do it, as is a sort of like plan to fool the crew. And it feels very wrong.
Investigating the radio equipment on the surface of the moon in a slow sequence with 60s moonwalking equipment, some unimportant scientists are attacked by the Cybermen and killed.
Again, this scene is completely necessary to further ramp up the tension. The Cybermen. So we're getting occasional scenes every 5 minutes of the Cybermen, but here now that they're ramping up their attacks, they're now actually attacking people rather than just stealing bodies of sick people.
It's almost as if they're stepping up their plans in a sort of logical manner.
Yes. Pacing, I guess. Good pacing is going on.
Yeah, so at last, credit where it's due.
The 10th Planet, when they first clobber some people on the outside, which is this scene is a direct rip-off of, they chop and it cuts. Whereas here, you get that POV of them raining blows on these people.
Chop, chop, reaction, reaction, chop, chop, reaction, reaction.
It's a lot more brutal and visceral. And it, as you say, this ramps up the tension of their violence.
Even if they are attacking with their metal fists. And suddenly we're at the end of the episode. Who'd have thunk it? The Doctor has checked everything, except, sugar. That's where the virus is coming from. Then the Doctor and crew see the virus claim another victim, and this earns him all the reprieves in the world, or the moon. These Cybermen have deliberately infected the base. Goodness help them. And we discover through a tense scene, good pacing again, that everybody in this base are idiots. And that's not a worded sentence, but you get my drift. Because they have failed to search the sick bay. That's where the Cybermen are hiding, or at least one of them are, dressed as patients. And it goes to attack, cliffhanger, and the bed wobbles in the most wonderful fashion.
Okay, well, I'm from this, I assume it's weaken the crew members to the point where they can easily come and take over, and then use the gravitron to do a thing to Earth. So that lets them take it over. Probably.
Because revenge!
And, reasons.
That's an emotion.
That will just take over Earth so they can settle it. Some generic reason, who cares, really?
No. This thing about the sugar, it only affects some people. Not everyone takes it!
It's far too subtle.
It's not subtle, it's rubbish.
Oh, okay.
Stupid idea.
What a rubbish plan.
It's like they thought they were being clever by saying, "Oh yes, they poisoned the sugar," but it's as though I could just imagine them thinking, "Oh yeah, if they might have seen it early on and that not everyone has been poisoned." Oh yeah, blah blah blah. But it's not really a good reveal at all. Like, oh, it's the sugar. It's like the fact that the Doctor's done all these tests and hasn't tested the food or the sugar.
He has tested the food. He says it like 3 times.
So that means you just didn't test the sugar? What?
I wrote down this wording of their plan. The Cybermen are poisoning the coffee of the tired workers. That's a parody of Doctor Who, not Doctor Who.
Damn it, Pedlar, this is a sci-fi, not a murder mystery.
Well,
it's a sci-fi, not a stupid thing.
This is probably...
Everyone is stupid.
It's
God,
Gerry Davis.
Rubbish.
Come on, it's Gerry Davis. Put the sugar in there. Look, everything that's bad in this is probably Gerry Davis.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
That was the Moonbase episode 2. Everybody is stupid. Here are the good things. Patrick Troughton. Menacing Cybermen every now and then. Never mind the stupid plots. Never mind the terrible writing of Gerry Davis. Never mind the feminism issues. This is 25 minutes worth of slightly interesting entertainment.
Yeah. No, this is definitely one of the better ones of the season. The serial, I'd say.
Thank our lucky stars it exists.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, I'm really glad that, the terrible things speech, you get to see Troughton's face when he says it, and you get to see him checking the guy's shoes, whatever. I'm glad that exists for that alone, really, because Troughton is such a visual actor.
He is carrying so much weight on his back, and he's doing it so well. We cannot stress this enough, because this is what made Doctor Who survive 50 years ago, and this is one of the very principal reasons why it's still here. Thank you very much for watching. You can find us on Blogspot, which redirects to iTunes. Leave positive comments there, it helps. You can also find us on Facebook and YouTube, where you can like, comment, and subscribe, and also Google Plus if you dare. We shall be back next week with episode 3 of the Moonbase with more terribly subtle weather puns. Until then, I have been Ben.
I've been Luke.
And I have been Nick.
Thank you, and goodbye.